Hi. When I was a teacher, I used to get involved in after-school clubs, like lots of teachers. So I was involved at one time. I started a blues harmonica club, and I was involved in a book club and a debating society, and I started a computer programming club. But I think if I was teaching now, I'd also want to start a cryptic crossword club. And you might think, well, what have crosswords got to do with anything really, especially to do with computing? Well, to answer that question, I'll start from the standpoint that Alan Turing, when he was recruiting people to work at Bletchley Park, he wanted people who could solve the Times crossword in 6 minutes, which actually takes some doing. Now, so what is it about cryptic crosswords? And I mean cryptic crosswords, not the straightforward ones, which aren't really as easy as you may think. The straightforward ones, they require you to know synonyms of words that they give you as the clues. And if you don't know the synonyms, you're forced to either guess or try and work it out from the grid. But with cryptic crosswords, there's actually a set of rules. And the set of rules are so standardized, even though they may be applied in different levels to different levels of strictness by different newspapers and compilers. The rules are so standardized that on many occasions I've actually worked out the answer and come up with a word that I've never heard of before and had to look it up in the dictionary, and then discovered, lo and behold, the word actually does exist. And that is simply because there's a set of rules. And there are various rules. I can't go into them now, obviously, in the course of 2 or 3 minutes. But just to give you a few examples, one of the benefits, I think, of learning how to do cryptic crosswords, or at least tackling them, is that it forces you to examine when you're making assumptions, because we do that without thinking most of the time. So, for example, if you take a clue like a little lower on the farm, and the answer is 4 letters, when we hear the word lower, then you're probably inclined to assume it's to do with height. You're thinking of either lower or higher. But if you think of it in a different way, think of lower in the same way as talker or walker. A talker is someone who talks. A walker is someone who walks. And therefore, by the same logic, a lower is someone or something that lows. And on a farm, that would be a cow. So a little lower would be a baby cow, and that would be a calf. So now you might think, well, okay, so what? Making assumptions, what difference does that make? Well, it makes a lot of difference in computer programming. If you devise a program that you assume is going to be used in a particular way, and people keep getting it wrong, then it's quite obvious, or it should be obvious, that your assumptions are wrong. Or to take a different example, if the interface is designed quite badly because the person or people who designed it have made particular assumptions, then people aren't going to be using it in the way they assumed, and therefore may find it very difficult. And I mean, I've had experience of this myself when trying to teach some older people how to use some websites where there are things going on all over the place, and it really isn't easy for someone not used to that environment to work out what they should be doing and where they should be doing it. So that's one thing. If it forces you to examine what assumptions you may have made, that's useful. And it would also be useful when it comes to debugging programs, because in order to debug a program, you actually have to have a mental model of how you expect the program to behave. And that implies that you've made certain assumptions about how it's going to behave. And sometimes you need to get back to basics and look at what assumptions you've made. Or at least be open to the possibility that you have indeed made some assumptions. Now, getting back to crosswords, there are other things. Sometimes you have to take things quite literally. For example, I came across a clue recently which was something along the lines of, I'm taken aback in anger at this illusion? And the answer was mirage, because I'm taken aback means that you put the word I'm backwards, so that's MI. Anger is rage, and you get mirage, which means illusion. Similarly, if you come across the word detailed, it probably isn't detailed, it might be detailed. In other words, the tail or end of the word has been chopped off. Here's another example. If you come across the term social worker in a clue, it probably doesn't mean someone who works in the social services, it probably means an ant. Ant, yes, because ants tend to be workers, apart from the queen ant, and they live and work in social groups, so called the ant colony. So an ant is a social worker, and by the same token, a 6-footer is not someone who's 6 feet tall, it's someone who's got 6 legs and therefore 6 feet. In other words, an insect. All of which sounds probably completely nuts, and it is in a way, but it's fun, and it does force you to think logically and laterally, and to examine when you're making certain assumptions. And it can also be quite humorous as well. So, for example, one of my favourite clues of all time is one I came across some years ago in the Daily Telegraph. Excuse me. The clue was something like, is this what an incompetent deep sea diver must do to get rid of an itch? And the answer was, come up to scratch, which is quite an awful mangling of the English language if you think about it, but quite humorous as well. Anyway, back to the Times. It is one of the more difficult crosswords around, I think, anyway. And so I need to get back to it now. So thank you for listening.